Hello, Shirley Adams for the Sewing Connection, Series 17, Program 13. At the start of this series, I said color is the big turn-on when it comes to fabric selection. You all have some favorites that you just can't resist. When I saw this fabric, however, I was attracted by the fact that every color's in it. I could imagine going over that cherry red skirt. And then there's also a little of those bright red pants. And the Kelly green is in another skirt. The teal blue green I have in suede, and my purple wool pants are great with it. Even that bright pink is in one of the yarns, to say nothing of this royal blue I have on. Oh yeah, it goes with about everything, and I better get it. So after I had it home, then it was a matter of deciding, what do I do with this fabric? Because it's a raw silk. If you don't know what raw silk is, instead of being cultivated silkworms, they grow out in the wild. And instead of being dipped in hot water and all the Saracen melting and all that fiber being unwound, the silkworms, as they hatch into moths, just break out of the cocoon, and then there are all those little short fibers, and those are gathered up from the wilds, and in with that comes some sticks and grasses and dust and dirt, and even though they dyed all kinds of bright colors as they have here, it felt icky. I didn't like the feel of it all. It felt like if I'd touch it very long, I'd probably have dirty hands when I got through. So the first thing I needed to do was send it to the cleaners. But then, even before then, it's before you handle it at all, what are you going to do with the ends of it, the cut ends? Because this ravels so terribly if you just touch it, if you just barely move it, things fall off it, and it really needed to be protected in some way. Well, I tried running it through the serger to just serge the end of it before I sent it to the cleaners, and then one whole big fat yarn would peel off along with the serger thread as it zigzagged over it. So that wasn't enough. What I ended up doing is on the sewing machine doing about 3 rows of zigzag stitches, and these were just kind of interlocked as the rows overlapped as I did those zigzag stitches, and that held it securely so it could go to the cleaners. And when it came back then, it not only felt clean and looked clean, but also it felt a little softer because it had been kind of harsh, kind of crisp. It still is to a certain extent, but the more you wear it, the softer it gets, is the character of silks like this. Well, after I was all ready to then put a pattern on it, it's of course deciding what pattern. Well, you've seen this several times in the last couple of series because you know me. Throughout all the shows I've done, I just keep using the same basic patterns over and over again. I do this real frequently, and I started cutting one out a few programs ago that I haven't cut out yet, but here's the pattern that I'm using, and it's still laid where you saw it on a program a few times back. So there's one of them. There are several others that I won't show you. Maybe you can remember which ones they are. Back on the mannequins, there are a couple of others, and one of them was the start of Series 16. I just cut it down to a V-neck and changed it considerably, but it's the same jacket. The other one is almost the same as this. It looks like it's in about the same form, and that was the start of this series. And there were many of them in between. In fact, the outfit that I'm wearing, this blue one, this is also the same pattern. I just changed it a little bit. But you can have a whole wardrobe out of the same pattern and nobody knows the difference if you just make little changes here and there. And of course the different fabrics make a lot of difference too. So I had nothing to match on this. There's no indication of a plaid. It's just randomly woven with all different colors, so I didn't have to worry at all about matching anything. So there was one little bonus, a little bit of a hurry up and get it done a little quicker. And what I did have to be concerned about, though, is making as few features in it as possible, because you don't want fussy seaming in this, all kinds of princess seams and so on. You don't want that, because they wouldn't show, for one thing. They would just get buried in all this texture and all the different colors there. So make it as simple as it can possibly be. So what I did to simplify this one is very similar to what I'm doing to simplify this hand-woven one that I'm working on right now. And what that is for one thing, eliminating the center back seam. There's no reason for it. There was no shape there. Make it in one piece to eliminate a seam so you don't have to worry about all the ravels. So I've just put where the stitching line would be, over on the fold of the fabric. Also, there's no sense in having a joining seam right here at the front edge. If you have enough of the fabric, you might as well just overlap the front and the front facing, put them in one piece as long as it's a straight line there. Make them in one piece and cut it as one, and it's just a little easier that way to not have that extra seam, and it eliminates some bulk. I like that part of it too. Then as far as the sleeve goes, I didn't want a seam there. What I did is just what you see down here, where it's overlapped, of course, and where it separates because it was a two-piece sleeve. There I'm just making a dart. So that dart is what you see in the top of this sleeve, except it also doesn't show. Everything just gets buried in this kind of fabric. So it's easy to work with once you get past all the raveling and once you find a way to eliminate that. Now, what especially is important for eliminating that raveling and making it possible to work on is a fusible interfacing instead of a sew-in. What I used in this is more crisp than I want it to be. What I regret sincerely is the fact that I made it before this one was available to me. This textured weft I have mentioned a couple of times on this series, and I absolutely love it. It stays soft and it's just wonderful. But what it really does is glue all that fabric together and make it possible to not lose any of it so it won't fall apart, so it will stay nicely. What I actually have inside this jacket is another fusible, the one that I have on here. And you have a couple of choices. For instance, what I did over on this one that I am in the process of making is I didn't have a very big piece, so I have simply fused that textured weft to the whole thing, all in one piece. The whole backing is covered with that, so immediately it's all protected and held together. The other option is to cut out the pattern pieces first, as I've done here, and then just put the individual pieces fusible side down against the wrong side of the fabric and just fuse those. And once it's all fused, then it's easy to just cut around like playing paper dolls, just cut out what's there once it's all part of the fabric and all connected together. So this is how you start, and then you have to make some big decisions that were a little difficult for me because I thought, oh, this is going to go with everything. So what kind of buttons am I going to put on it? I at first thought, well, I'll do some little eyelets here, and if you've never made eyelets and made removable buttons, we'll possibly have time at the end of the program. I'll show you how. But what I would do if I would make eyelets is probably underneath put something to stabilize. Maybe I would put some grosgrain ribbon or something of that sort on the underside, make eyelets, and then you buy a lot of buttons that have these little things on the back of the button card. Save some of those. And if you want to have removable buttons on a garment so that you can change every time you wear it with a different color, or if they're difficult buttons that won't go through the dry cleaner and you want to remove them every time, save these things because the shank of the button would go through the eyelet, this would be connected at the back of it, and it would be a temporary thing. And that might be one way to make a lot of different choices. Well, to make eyelets on this, it isn't too likely. It's too thick and heavy, and it wasn't going to work on this. So I finally decided, okay, I have to commit myself to something. I decided on these red buttons because I thought the overall look of this is basically a deep red. And as soon as I got those buttons on it, I decided that, well, maybe the overall look of it is really a blue. And so I had these blue buttons. I haven't changed and I'm not going to. I committed and I'm going to stay with that. But you can see about every button will go with it, so it is a choice. I did a button program back in Series 16. And here are just a few buttons left over from that. This was a Chinese ball button, and actually it's this fabric that I have on. Now this might have been another choice on it, or maybe just a twist of, it was a tube fabric originally, but it's some man-made leather. That might have made a nice button on it because there is some of that bright red. This particular color is not in it. This is kind of a rusty color, but this was another one. It's like making yeast rolls, a crescent roll. It's all rolled up and glued. It's just suede. That type of toggle button might have been a choice. Here's a red button that I covered. This is also leather with a little pin tucking on it. So there are all sorts of choices. Or also back on that button show last series, I used a little of this fabric, one of the yarns that had raveled off, and just put glue on top of this button and then made that yarn go round and round, so I covered the button that way. Anyway, you can think up all kinds of choices if you can't find a commercial button. But when it's this many colors, the choices are so endless, you'll find a button that goes with it if you prefer the commercial ones. Well, after you have all those initial decisions made, oh, one more here, what are we going to line it with? Well, I decided, let's go blue. Let's just do it with this. And it still doesn't matter. This would still go over anything else I plan to wear it with, so it still remains a pretty neutral jacket as far as what it will go with. I haven't limited my choices any, really. What I have done then to change the pattern, I've just combined things as I told you for this. But then when I was making the blue one that I'm wearing, I had a few other things. For instance, since this was not going to be an outer jacket, since this is more like a two-piece dress, except it's pants, I guess it's not a two-piece dress, but I wanted a little slimmer sleeve instead of the wider one the jacket had. I cut it out as it was, not knowing exactly how much I wanted to take off, and just pinned it together first and tried it on. Here's how much I decided to take away, and you can see I'll just put this on the sleeve pattern down here. This is how much I took off. It needed to be this much shorter, and I tapered it down that much at the wrist. And the reason for that was because I just wanted a shallow hem in this. This is the type fabric. It's actually, it's not a fabric that feels really nice. It's kind of harsh. Actually, this fabric, when it comes right down to it, is a tribute to the people who have furnished equipment for all of my programs, because without good equipment, I couldn't really have done this. Now, I needed good pressing equipment, and I needed good any kind of equipment. Because it's a difficult fabric to work with. It looks like it's a wool crepe. It's actually a polyester crepe, and it's just one of those fabrics that are a little bit stubborn. So with the right equipment, I was pleased that it all turned out just fine. But what I have done here for a hem is just turn it under twice and top stitched it twice. There's a stitching line right at the edge and another one up at the top of the hem. But on this particular fabric, instead of a deeper hem that you do maybe by hand or maybe with a blind hem stitch, it looked better to top stitch it like this. So every fabric dictates what it wants to have done to it in order to make it look the most professional that you possibly can. Now, what I've also done with this is cut it a little wider. Now, what do you do to cut it a little wider, which is very easy? It's simply going at the side seam here and just tapering it out, just making it wider. It's that easy. So here's the back. Just make it wider. Do the same with the front. On the side seam there, I would just make it wider. Also, I didn't want this to be as short a jacket. I wanted this to be an over blouse, and so I cut it down a little bit longer. That also is easy enough. And then I put a casing around the waist. Now, when you put a casing on, it's a good idea to first of all put an elastic around your waist and mark exactly where your waist is, or maybe a piece of, or a tape measure, whatever, because it's very likely your waist isn't parallel with the floor all the way around. It might dip down and back, or maybe in front or wherever, or maybe one hip's higher, and then it doesn't hang right on you. In order to have it hang just right, you need to have it right at your waistline. And the easiest place is just to mark it on the wrong side, or put pins on the right side and transpose them to the wrong side. But do mark your waist. And then I've just, with a bias tape maker here, I've taken some soft fabric because it's going to be against my skin. It's going to be snug. And so I wanted some soft fabric there. A lining fabric is what I used. And just used a bias tape maker to make a wide bias tape, because that's what this cord goes through. And what the cord is, of course, is bias cut fashion fabric here. It's long, quite long. In fact, the good length for a tie belt like this, if you want to tie it in a bow and have some tails hanging down, measure the width of your whole jacket, whatever it is, and add about a foot or so to it. And so that's what this is, the whole measurement when it's all stretched out. And remember, this stretches out more than the jackets because I added the extra flare at the side. So it's really quite large. And by the time I add an extra foot, I have this to tie a bow and draw it in. Now, you also have to think, if you're going to have a drawstring in something like this, how those ties come out. What I have here is a little buttonhole, and to make that buttonhole, to make sure that it's going to be secure, it's a good idea to always just cut a little circle of fusible interfacing and fuse it to the wrong side before you make the buttonhole, so that you have that reinforcement. And then, of course, on the underside, the inside of the garment, this buttonhole isn't there at all. Instead, there you have the bias underlapping that buttonhole, and then it's stitched around the front part of the buttonhole. So very easy to add these features. Nobody knows that you use the same pattern over and over again. when you just make little changes. Well, let's go over to the machine and I'll show you a few things that I've done on this. And with these tubes, let me just tell you, I've used, of course, fast turns many times, but they're just invaluable for making such things as these belts. I've used them on that jacket, that pinky one over there. I've used them there for button loops. It's just a tube there. So they're really quite useful here and there and in a lot of places. And after you have this bias cut and stitched, you turn it over a fast turn, and at the same time you're turning it, you just pull the cable cord in. Here I have cable cord inside it. And that way it rounds out, but it's nice and soft. It doesn't get stiff. Don't, for instance, make the mistake of putting upholstery welting in it, because then it would be stiff. It wouldn't hang nicely. These little metal tips, by the way, you can find probably in notions departments. So look around the areas where there are snaps and buttons and any of that, and you'll probably find them. What I did to put those on is just put a little glob of fabric glue down inside the tip and then push the fabric down in it, and it stays. It'll be just fine. Anytime you use glue, be sure you read the directions and make sure whether it's washable or dry cleanable or however it needs to be worked on. Okay, well, what I have done here is not put any buttonholes in this. I don't think I even told you about that, but I finally decided not to put buttonholes in it at all because it's so heavy and it's so loosely woven. What I've done instead is just have this twisted cord down here, and every once in a while there's a button loop in it. Now, where I got that twisted cord, goodness, this thing ravels so easily, as I told you. Let me show you how terribly it ravels. And if I just shake it, look at all the crumbs that end up on the table. So you can see it's a bit of a mess to work with, but once you have it done, it's going to be all right. But look, this just ravels so easily. So what I have done is, probably with a couple of these raveled out yarns, I have made this big long strand that goes all the way down the front, and Furniture makes buttonholes. And the way you do this is to just, well, a couple of ways. If it won't work on your bobbin winder, depending on what your bobbin winder is, if it won't work on there, you can just twist it. And what I would do if I would just twist it is put it on an extra spool pin like this, and just put it at the top of the machine and put the big long cord, and I might be across the other side of the room doing this because I'd have just as long a cord as I could get, or yarn, and then I would just keep twisting and twisting. And when you twist it enough that you can feel it kind of pulling you toward the machine, that's when you put your finger in the middle and let it back twist against itself, and then it makes a heavy cord. The other way is to put it on a bobbin, and I don't have a very long one here, so it really won't work very well on a bobbin, but the way you would do that is to put it on the bobbin and put the bobbin over so that it's working. And this is, well, maybe it will. No, it won't. This one I did have to do over the spool pin because this is just too fatty yarn. It won't happen. But what you do, if you have a thin enough yarn, is put it through the middle hole, put it on your bobbin, put it in operation and push the foot pedal, and then just hold the ends of it here and let it twist. And that's a quicker and easier way than to do it manually. But either way, it's doable, it's possible, no matter which way you have to treat it. And after it all back twists, then you have that nice big heavy cord, and that's what I've used here as a button loop. It's this heavy cord that goes all the way down the front. Now, how I stitched that on was with a machine zigzag, and you can't even see it, of course, with all these colors. It just blends in. I used a kind of a burgundy thread to do it, and it just zigzagged on. Whenever I'd come to where I wanted a button loop, I would just back stitch and then start the other side so that the button loop's big enough to go over the button. You can always figure out some way to do whatever your end purpose is. Then what I have inside this garment that I'm wearing, this overblouse, there are some shoulder pads there. And I said this is kind of harsh fabric. What's comfortable about this whole top is the fact that I have shoulder pads that kind of hold it up off my body, and the only other place really that it touches my body is around the waist, where I also have a soft lining. So to make a shoulder pad for this, here's an easy way to do it. This fabric has been cut on the bias because that's the way it's going to mold best around a shape. And these shoulder pads are just molded fiber fill. You can buy those in the notions departments too. So I've just put it with the bias here and there, put the bias over it, and this is going to be out at the shoulder end. This is toward your neck. So you just fold it over, and I usually like to put a few pins in this. Now you can put this directly in the serger, but I want to know that it's going to really do a good job and come out looking just right and everything finished up. So I always put a few pins in this where I can feel what's happening, because when you do this in the serger you can't really feel that you're at the edge. Here I can feel with my thumb and finger right where the edge is. And I'm putting the pins there. They are just barely catching the edge of the shoulder pad because I want it to really do a nice job. Now nobody's going to see the inside of this. This isn't a top you take off. But I just always feel better when I know that the inside looks as nice as the outside, and that the quality is every bit as good in there. It just gives you a different feeling, and so this is important to me. Didn't your mother always tell you, now if it's worth doing right? And I just can't get over that. I remember she said that to me. I'm going to take this foot off and put another one on. And with this one, it has a flat platform. And then I can just stitch that around. And this is just straight stitch. Is that what I have? Indeed it is. And when I come to the pins, then I'll take them out. And I'm just following the shape of the pad around. And after I get this all finished here, then I will put it on the serger and finish up the edges nicely. Okay, because right now when I cut this off, it's just going to be, raw fabric. So I would always cut it a little bit generously so that in the serger that knife blade can cut off the rest of it. But this really does make a nice pad. And then you just serge that raw edge. But you can see this pad is just very smooth because it's cut on the bias, so it really looks nice on both sides. Whereas if you'd cut it on the straight, it wouldn't work very well at all. I had said that we might do an eyelet over here, and that's if you want a removable button. Well, let's just do an eyelet. I'll put another foot on here, and I'll change my stitch pattern, because probably you have an eyelet on your machine. And so look through all the display and see if you don't, if you've never used it before. It's kind of a fun thing to use. Now the reason I put this foot in or on it is because there's a little uplifted place underneath. And I'm going to go back to the stitches, and I'm going to go up here actually, and I'm going to go back to the menu because I find my eyelet is number 129. It's way back here. So I'll just keep moving along through my wonderful stitches until I get to 129. There it is. And now it's on eyelet. And then you simply push the power and let it make an eyelet. And this might be nice if you're making belts or whatever it is that you need to do. And if you don't quit, or if you don't push the button, it'll keep on making eyelets. So there's a little button back here. As soon as it starts sewing, you push the button and it just makes one eyelet and stops at the end of it. But look to see on your machine if you don't also have that. So you always have to remember to push that little button so that it'll stop when you want it to. But this is nice if you need to take those buttons off and change them and put something else on. I might as well go ahead and serge this and show you what it looks like when it's all finished. Of course, though, I would use the same color thread instead of pink as I have here, but it does make a nice finish on this pad and make it look very professional. So if I just get it under here, I'll go ahead and serge that. And I'm going to stop here to pull it down because this fabric is so, slippery, it was kind of bouncing up and it was going to double back against itself. So I'll just sort of hold it here so it can't do that. And most fabrics are not this soft. Okay, so it's that easy, and it turns out looking just like the pads that you'd find in ready to wear. After you have this done, then you have to decide at some point what to do at the ends. Some people prefer to put a little seam sealant here, and if that seems to be scratchy on you, then instead put a tapestry needle and pull it through, or just put it there and put a little straight stitch over, just something so that it can't come apart, and it's going to make a really nice shoulder pad to sew in. So all of these things you do, you know, I've been doing these things for so long. I have been changing patterns because I always start out with the basic and then do something from there. I have always been paying attention to what kind of notions I use and so on. You keep doing the same things through the years if they work well, and then just hopefully keep improving. Every time I look around, I see better ideas, and so from that standpoint, I do keep changing things a little bit. Well, we have based every show in this series on a color, and this coat of many colors, this is the last show in the line. So what color is my world? Well, it is an absolute rainbow of happy hues. Life is lovely if you just choose to do your favorite things as a hobby and as a business, which I have in sewing, a most satisfying pursuit. This was program 221 of the Sewing Connection. Through the years, sewers have frequently asked, "Won't I ever run out of ideas?" And no, I never would. If it were program 5000, I would still have endless exciting directions to take sewing. Just look around you. There are no bounds. Well, this is more than just the end of a series. It's also the end of an era. It's the last Sewing Connection program because other options, other colors are beckoning, and I need the time to pursue them. Many of my programs will still be seen on public television, and if you missed any, they're all available from our office in video and book form. Live seminars are such a delight because then I can speak with so many of you in person. I'll be doing a lot of those, as always, and I'm scheduled far into the future for speaking. But a lot of other surprises also lie ahead for me. I really want to thank everyone involved with this, my family, people in my office, and in this studio. They've become like family. Certainly thanks to the program underwriters whose products I really believe in and I use constantly at home as well as here. The right equipment really makes the job simple and pleasurable. And I most especially want to thank you, the viewer. Through the years, I've had thousands of cards and letters, expressions of friendship, and I feel a genuine affection for you all. Sewers are the nicest people, and I want to stay connected since that's the whole premise of this show. I'm Shirley Adams, and from the Sewing Connection, now and always, I wish you joy.